This is going to be a long video because I'm going to read out the entire case document between Katie Johnson versus Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein. If you want to find it and read it yourself, it's case 516-CV-00797-DMG-KS. So here we go. Plaintiff Katie Johnson, for causes of actions against defendants Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein, alleges as follows. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, alleges that the defendants, Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein, did willfully and with extreme malice violate her civil rights under 18 U.S.C. 2241 by sexually and physically abusing plaintiff Johnson, by forcing her to engage in various perverted and depraved sex acts, by threatening physical harm to plaintiff Johnson and also her family. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, alleges that the defendants, Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein, also did willfully and with extreme malice violate her civil rights under 42 U.S.C. 1985 by conspiring to deny plaintiff Johnson her civil rights by making her their sex slave. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, alleges she was subject to extreme sexual and physical abuse by the defendants, Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein, including forcible rape during a 4-month time span, covering the months of June to September 1994, when plaintiff Johnson was still only a minor of age 13. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, alleges she was enticed by promises of money and a modeling career to attend a series of underage sex parties held at the New York City residence of defendant Jeffrey E. Epstein and attended by defendant Donald J. Trump. On the first occasion involving the defendant, Donald J. Trump, the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was forced to manually stimulate defendant Trump with the use of her hand upon defendant Trump's erect penis until he reached sexual orgasm. On the second occasion involving the defendant, Donald J. Trump, the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was forced to orally copulate defendant Trump by placing her mouth upon his erect penis until he reached sexual orgasm. On the third occasion, she was forced to engage in an unnatural lesbian sex act with her fellow minor and sex slave, Maria Doe, age 12, for the sexual enjoyment of defendant Trump. After this sex act, both minors were forced to orally copulate defendant Trump by placing their mouths simultaneously on his erect penis until he achieved sexual orgasm. After zipping up his pants, defendant Trump physically pushed both minors away while angrily berating them for the poor quality of their sexual performance. A 12 and 13-year-old. On the fourth and final sexual encounter with the defendant, Donald J. Trump, the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was tied to a bed by defendant Trump, who then proceeded to forcibly rape plaintiff Johnson. During the course of the savage sexual attack, plaintiff Johnson loudly pleaded with defendant Trump to please wear a condom. Defendant Trump responded by violently striking plaintiff Johnson in the face with his open hand and screaming that he would do whatever he wanted as he refused to wear protection. After achieving sexual orgasm, the defendant, Donald J. Trump, put his suit back on, and when the defendant, Katie Johnson, in tears, asked defendant Trump what would happen if he had impregnated her, defendant Trump grabbed his wallet and threw some money at her and screamed that she should use the money to get a fucking abortion. On the first occasion involving the defendant, Jeffrey E. Epstein, the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was forced to disrobe into her bra and panties and to give a full-body massage to defendant Epstein while he was completely naked. During the massage, defendant Epstein physically forced plaintiff Johnson to touch his erect penis with her bare hands and to clean up his ejaculated semen after he achieved sexual orgasm. On the second occasion involving the defendant, Jeffrey Epstein, she was forced again to disrobe into her bra and panties while giving defendant Epstein a full-body massage while he was completely naked. The defendant, Donald J. Trump, was also present as he was getting his own massage from another minor, Jane Doe, age 13. Defendant Epstein forced plaintiff Johnson to touch his erect penis by physically placing her bare hands upon his sex organ, and again forced plaintiff Johnson to clean up his ejaculated semen after he achieved sexual orgasm. Shortly after this sexual assault by the defendant, Jeffrey E. Epstein, on the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, plaintiff Johnson was still present while the two defendants were arguing over who would be the one to take plaintiff Johnson's virginity. The defendant, Donald J. Trump, was clearly heard referring to defendant Jeffrey E. Epstein as a Jew bastard as he yelled at defendant Epstein that clearly he, defendant Trump, should be the lucky one to pop the cherry of plaintiff Johnson. Third and final sexual assault by defendant Jeffrey E. Epstein on the plaintiff Katie Johnson took place after plaintiff Johnson had been brutally and savagely raped by defendant Trump. While receiving another full-body massage from plaintiff Johnson while in the nude, defendant Epstein became so enraged after finding out that defendant Trump had been the one to take plaintiff Johnson's virginity that defendant Epstein also violently raped plaintiff Johnson. After forcing plaintiff Johnson to disrobe into her bra and panties while receiving a massage from the plaintiff, defendant Epstein attempted to enter plaintiff Johnson's anal cavity with his erect penis while trying to restrain her. Plaintiff Johnson attempted to push defendant Epstein away, at which defendant Epstein attempted to enter plaintiff Johnson's vagina with his erect penis. This attempt to brutally sodomize and rape plaintiff Johnson by defendant Epstein was finally repelled by plaintiff Johnson, but not before defendant Epstein was able to achieve sexual orgasm. After perversely sodomizing and raping the plaintiff, Katie Johnson, the defendant, Jeffrey E. Epstein, attempted to strike her about the head with his closed fists while he angrily screamed at plaintiff Johnson that he, defendant Epstein, should have been the one who took her cherry, not Mr. Trump, before she finally managed to break away from defendant Epstein. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, was fully warned on more than one occasion by both defendants, Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein, that were she ever to reveal any of the details of the sexual and physical abuse that she had suffered as a sex slave for defendant Trump and defendant Epstein, that plaintiff Johnson and her family would be in mortal danger. Plaintiff Johnson was warned that this would mean certain death for herself and plaintiff Johnson's family unless she remained silent forever on the exact details of the depraved and perverted sexual and physical abuse she had been forced to endure from the defendants. I'm going to go skip a page to claim for relief. The plaintiff, Katie Johnson, asks the court for relief against the defendants Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey E. Epstein in the amount of $100 million as the result of the defendants' aforementioned acts upon which they willfully and maliciously violated the civil rights of the plaintiff as stated in 18 U.S.C. 2241 by sexually and physically abusing the then 13-year-old plaintiff Johnson under threat of harm to her and her family, and 42 U.S.C. 1985 by the defendants conspiring to deny the civil rights of plaintiff Johnson by making her their sex slave. This is dated April 26, 2016. I had already heard some of this, and I've been putting off making a video about it because I literally can't stomach it. Please don't vote for Trump. Please. Everyone needs to hear this. Everyone needs to read it. It's so hard to listen to and so hard to read. And if you're a person who doesn't care, I don't even know what to say.